Hello, friends. Hello, citizens of humanity. My name is Colin Bigelow, and I've worked daily with the Einstein of consciousness integral philosopher Ken Wilber since 2002, and I'm his only publicly named spiritual successor. This script just changed in the past few minutes. I had finished writing, I was happy with it, and I was ready to record. But grief is a hell of a thing, and I have a lot to grieve from my childhood. A mask of sadness just descended over my face for no conscious reason I could identify. And I was thinking, God, I can't record this material with this grief etched into every inch of my face. Then, Lord, it shifted to shame, and now my entire face is red. And damn it, now I'm pissed off. So it's all over the place. But then I remembered something. Simon Sinek recorded a video talking about what he had learned by spending time with military professionals, and particularly what leadership means at the highest level. Simon recounted a story where he, or maybe someone else, was describing on stage some of the most difficult circumstances someone can live through, and usually because one or more of your comrades in arms did not. Whoever was recounting the story on stage started visibly breaking down, shaking, crying, almost literally unable to speak. In the so-called normal world, people would respond with compassion, softness, and let the speaker excuse themselves from the stage, rather than fall apart completely in front of hundreds of people. But this was the military world, and something very different happened. A senior officer from the back of the room simply and clearly said, "Go on." 2 words. Go on. Tell the story, the real story, no matter how bad you think you look in telling it. Don't run from the difficult parts, and don't hide from them. Not from us, your deepest peers, your brothers and sisters in arms. And so that's exactly what the speaker did. And it was transformational for everyone in the room. So I will do the same for you. I will go on. I will not hide from you. The first video I created, called Ethos, went live on December 11th. In it, I made very clear that I'm trying to enact, to the best of my ability, an Abrahamic form of faith. When God tells him to walk, he walks, and that is my task as well, but in talking rather than walking. My initial task, as God commanded me to do, was to make a video conveying the essential need for humanity to develop a moral and spiritual identity as citizens of humanity, such that we genuinely experience each other as family, wherein we do all we can to preserve global peace, and if we must serve in a military capacity, that we do so in the highest ethical manner. It was a global call to serve and protect all for the sake of all. For if this world goes to war, we may end up in darker places than ever before. Now, returning to the topic of Abrahamic faith and my attempt to live that reality with my whole being. Literally stated to Abram before God renamed him Abraham, "Go forth from your land, from your birthplace, and from your father's house, to the land that I will show you." In the Jewish tradition, the form of faith Abraham practiced is called emunah. Part of what I wrote in Ethos is worth repeating, because it's not simply that I'm trying to live up to the form of faith called emunah. It's that by my asking you to identify and act as citizens of humanity, some form of deep faith is essential, as guided by a higher power of your understanding and your choice. And an agnostic or atheist moral ideal is a perfectly fine higher power if that is what is real and meaningful to you. This means that there are myriad forms of faith around the world that can serve you well and deeply, so long as it is something you develop consciously. So I'm sharing how my faith is developing, and perhaps most importantly, the areas where I am struggling the most and where I've made mistakes. As I had written previously, in a sentence, emunah is the courage to remain faithful, responsible, and oriented toward the good, even when the ground is not solid beneath your feet. Emunah is not so much about what faith normally means, where faith means holding the correct beliefs about God. It is living in a way that shows trust in God and reliability to God. It is shown by action, loyalty, and perseverance. When God told Abraham to walk, he walked and kept walking, even amidst fear, doubt, failure, and uncertainty. Previously, when I thought about the idea of wilderness in Judaism, I thought about Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, and then they spent 40 years in the desert. I have to tell you, I have been in the wilderness the past 2 weeks, and it tested me in ways I have never been tested before. And by tested, I mean almost drowning. It didn't even occur to me until 2 days ago that I've been in the wilderness. And suddenly my suffering and confusion and disorientation and anger at the feeling that God had abandoned me all made sense. This made me re-look into what being in the wilderness meant to Abraham. A brief ChatGPT statement, quote, Abraham enters the wilderness because God calls him to do so. The desert is the place where faith begins, without maps, institutions, or guarantees. That statement just kills me. The desert is the place where faith begins. It goes to the heart of me because that's what I'm living. I'm in the desert, and my understanding of what real faith is developing here. It's a faith unlike anything I've ever experienced. And it's a lot deeper. It is one thing to be willing to leave all that is known to you and enter the desert, because you are certain God has called you to do so. My Ethos video was me willingly entering the desert. God was pleased with what I had done, and so was I. But the past 2 weeks have shown me it is another thing entirely to be in the desert. Knowing you cannot return to safety, knowing you must walk forward, but how do you even know what direction forward is if it feels like God has gone silent and has abandoned you in the most bewildering environment possible. I'm going to copy another section from ChatGPT directly, and as always, please forgive me for any errors I make. I'm still very much a beginner in Judaism. Quote, "The wilderness as a spiritual testing ground. In the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, the wilderness is where security is stripped away, dependence on God is learned, faith is proven through action." For Abraham, this includes trusting a promise with no visible fulfillment, living as a landless stranger, acting ethically without laws or institutions. His faith, his emunah, is shown not by belief alone, but by walking forward without certainty. By walking forward without certainty. That is the essence of what being in the wilderness has felt like to me. And in my experience, it feels like a great forest, not a vast desert. It's to walk forward without certainty, to have lost all sense of what forward even is, and to feel that walking into the forest, even when done so with great and noble purpose, was in fact a grave mistake, a mistake you may never recover from. I'm reminded of both Fangorn and Mirkwood forests from The Lord of the Rings. As depicted in the films, or at least how I remember them, these are great, ancient, dark, menacing forests who do not want you there and will deceive and harm you if they can. The trees are so old, tall, and numerous that no sunlight can penetrate the leaves above. You cannot use the sun, moon, or stars for direction, and either no paths whatsoever exist, or the paths are numerous, branching, and only lead you in circles. That has been my wilderness. A wilderness God commanded me to enter, and I did so gladly. But having entered that great, dark forest, I could hear God no longer. I couldn't even see the sky, and the concept of walking forward had no meaning because I had no sense of forward whatsoever. As a child, I suffered life-threatening abuse. I was certain that God existed, and I was equally certain God hated me, because God very much appeared to be on the side of my abusers. To say I felt betrayed by God is a wild understatement. Having entered that great dark forest these past few weeks at God's command, and then to feel that God had vanished completely, that feeling of childhood betrayal by God returned with a vengeance. And without a sense of direction or hope, I spiraled into childhood flashbacks of the worst possible variety. I felt utterly alone, because that is what flashbacks of that extremity always do. but I wasn't alone. Andrea Engel has been a very close part of my life for 19 years, and with Ken Wilber, it's 23 years. Andrea has developed an incredibly sensitive, yet incredibly clear capacity to help walk me out of flashbacks, and if I need to seek care, to get it. And when necessary, Ken has paid out of his own pocket to get me the care I need, repeatedly. I've never been alone. And in fact, without those two in my life, the chances I would have taken my own life over the past 5 years or so approaches nearly 100%. So I really and truly have never been alone. So, yet again, a few days ago, Andrea walked me out of my flashbacks. Not with force, not even with persuasion, just the simple fact that she loves me with clarity and not coercion, and is willing to simply walk beside me as I take one small step after another towards returning to the Colin that is full of love and life and has so much to offer to the world and himself. Bari Weiss is one of my heroes. A few years ago, I heard her give a speech about, and I'm paraphrasing here, quote, Abraham's extraordinary moral and spiritual strength in choosing to stand alone. Not alone within a tribe, but utterly alone. I presume the aloneness she was referring to was his singular person proclaiming to all that there is only one God, God is moral, and that we should live ethically. I remember feeling then quite clearly that there would come a moment when God would require me to speak, and that I may be required to endure such aloneness myself, because I would be prohibited from editing what God wanted me to say in order to preserve any human relationship. I spoke to two of my rabbis at Temple Emmanuel in November about this prophetic voice that I knew was near, and that I knew I would have to speak aloud, and soon. Both rabbis pointed out that Abraham did not in fact go into the desert alone. He went with his wife, his nephew, various servants and dependents, livestock, goods, tents, and so on. He may have been alone in his task, but his entire household traveled with him and supported him. Further, my rabbis pointed out that after coming to temple regularly for over a year and enrolling in the Introduction to Judaism class with the aim of converting, I'm now part of the largest Jewish congregation between Kansas City and the West Coast. I am most certainly not alone. The entire point about my advocating for identifying and acting as citizens of humanity is that we develop a humanistic community of shared values, both within nations and between nations. The numbers of things we have genuinely reasonable fear of happening or are already happening are enormous. And if things take a turn for the decidedly worse, our sense of aloneness, disconnection, hopelessness, godlessness, and fear could deepen very, very fast. My community pulled me out of my flashbacks, out of my wilderness, by reminding me in a way that spoke to my heart and not just my mind that I am not alone. We must find ways to do this for each other, within nations and between nations. Here, now, I must share the most crucial point of this entire story. After I created Ethos, I made one crucial, disastrous mistake. The process of writing and shooting and sharing that video made me tired in a way I had no memory of ever feeling before. Dimensions of me I didn't even know existed were exhausted. When God Mind has something to say through me, it is always a downward fire hose of energy, beginning above my head and then going all the way down to my toes. I thought I did a pretty good job with the Ethos video, so I effectively reached up above my head and closed down the God fire hose completely, because that's what I thought I needed in order to rest. So why did I feel like I was lost in the wilderness? Because I literally shut off God's access to me. God didn't abandon me, I abandoned God. Oops. And I did this because of old beliefs about God from childhood, that God only wants something from me to accomplish something through me. The thought that God loves me and feels great affection for me didn't even occur to me now as an adult. So I was proud of the work I accomplished, but unconsciously I felt used. Like I was merely a tool for God bringing a message into the world that only I could give voice to, and if I felt utterly depleted at the end of that process, God didn't care and wouldn't help restore me. Emunah is about steadfast belief and loyalty over time. Bitachon is about how you act because of what you believe. Emunah is believing that God is faithful. Bitachon is living as if that belief is true. Bitachon is active trust, especially when things are most difficult. So I had enough emunah to enter the wilderness because God told me to do so. But I had zero bitachon, zero active trust that God would love me and care for me while in the wilderness. Subconsciously, based on childhood trauma, I believed God would leave me there to die once God had gotten what God wanted from me. My child self believed all interactions with God were transactional and intrinsically exploitive. In the present, I still hadn't really explored the importance of covenant in Judaism, and I suffered greatly for that deficiency. Quote, Jews believe that we have a covenant with God. A covenant is a relationship of reciprocal love, caring, and loyalty. From reformjudaism.org. Well, that's a relationship with God I can really get behind. That sounds amazing. Let's do that. As always, I'm simply sharing my experience as one version of what it means to develop faith and a relationship with a higher power of your understanding and your choice. I'm not evangelizing Judaism in any way, and Jews just don't do that. People who choose to identify and act as citizens of humanity may be put under extraordinary strain. If the world divides up even further into more explicitly warring camps, you will be put under enormous pressure to pick your side. And that may be the right thing to do. It depends on what your side is actually doing and why. But if your moral and spiritual center as a citizen of humanity prevents you from participating in what your side is doing, life could get very hard indeed. That's why we need each other, so that we know that we are not alone in the wilderness. And we need a deep and enduring relationship with a higher power of our understanding for exactly the same reason. Thank you for being here with me today. I love you. Talk soon.